My daughter was buried. The casket was sealed. But 3 nights later, I got a text from her number. What I found when I dug her up will haunt me for the rest of my life. I used to think losing a child would come like a lightning strike. Loud, violent, sudden. But it didn't. When Lily died, it came quietly. A phone call in the middle of the night. A voice on the other end that didn't pause for breath. Didn't ask if I was sitting down. Just facts. Clinical. Final. A fatal car accident. She'd been alone. They believed she lost control. There was nothing left to save. They were sorry. They told me I didn't need to come identify the body. That her father had already done it. That it was better that way. I didn't argue. I didn't question anything. I just sat on the floor of the hallway outside my bedroom, holding the phone in both hands, and forgot how to move. Her name was Lily. She was 20, And yes, she was difficult sometimes, stubborn, loud, a little too sharp for her own good, but she was mine. She had fire in her, the kind that could burn people or light up a whole room. We didn't always get along. Sometimes I said things I shouldn't have. Sometimes she did too. But she was my daughter, and she was gone. The funeral was held 4 days later in the small white chapel on the edge of town, the same one my father was buried in. The casket was closed, just as the coroner had advised. It's better this way, they told me. You'll want to remember her face, not the damage. So I agreed. I signed the paperwork. I chose the flowers. I stood next to her father, silent, while he accepted sympathy from people who barely knew us. The only thing I insisted on, the only thing I fought for, was her phone. It had always been practically sewn into her palm. She lived through that screen. I remember teasing her once that she'd be buried with it. And now, she was. I told the funeral director I wanted her to have it with her. He hesitated, said there were policies, then shrugged and made it happen. I didn't ask questions. I didn't care what it meant. I just needed her to have that one small thing with her. And then we buried her. They lowered the casket into the ground. I watched the earth swallow the last thing that still felt like part of me. And when it was over, I went home, sat on the edge of her bed, and waited for grief to knock me flat. But it didn't come like that. It came slower, stranger, like something you forget you're drowning in until your chest starts to ache. It was 4 nights later when the message came. I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. I had left the hallway light on, as if that could trick my body into thinking she might still be awake in the next room. I sat on the couch with a blanket pulled to my chin, trying not to cry again. When my phone lit up on the coffee table. 1. New message. Lily. I stared at it, unblinking, for what must have been a full minute. I hadn't touched her contact since the accident. I hadn't dared. But there it was. Her name. Her heart emoji. Her tone. My hands moved without me. I opened the message. Mom, I'm still here. Please don't let them do this to me. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I didn't even breathe. I just read it again and again. The words were too exact. The phrasing too real. It sounded like her. Not the voice she used around friends or teachers, but the one she used only with me. Late at night, when she was scared. It took me 3 tries to unlock the screen. My fingers were shaking so badly, I kept mistyping the code. I texted back, "Who is this? What kind of sick joke is this?" No reply. I called the number. 4 rings, no voicemail. Just silence. My whole body went cold. The police had told me the phone had been placed with her, just as I'd asked. The funeral home had confirmed it. The battery should have died days ago. And yet, it was active. It had signal. It had spoken. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was grieving, but because something inside me had cracked open, and something colder had taken its place. I didn't tell anyone at first, not because I was afraid of sounding crazy. Though, deep down, I knew exactly how it would sound, but because I needed time to convince myself I wasn't imagining things, that it wasn't just grief, or trauma, or some cruel coincidence that had wormed its way into my mind and made itself real. But by the second night, I had run out of explanations. Because that's when the next message came. It was just after 3 a.m. The house was silent. I'd been lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling for hours. When the screen lit up again, I didn't gasp. I didn't hesitate. I just unlocked the phone and read it like I'd been expecting it all along. It's dark. I can't breathe right. They think I'm dead, but I'm not. There was something terrifying about how calm it was, how it wasn't begging or screaming, just stating a fact, like someone whispering in the dark, saving their strength, unsure if their words were even being heard. I stared at the message so long the screen dimmed and locked again. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? Should I drive to the cemetery? Should I dig that night? I sat in the kitchen until the sun came up, rereading both messages over and over, as if the way they were typed, the cadence, the spelling, would give me proof. And strangely, it did, because Lily always omitted punctuation, always capitalized random words. Her texts had rhythm, voice. You could hear her in them. This wasn't spam. This wasn't AI. This wasn't someone pretending to be her. This was my daughter. Somewhere, still trying to reach me. That morning, I called the phone company. I told them I was the account holder, that I needed to trace the last pings from my daughter's number. They refused. Policies, privacy, legal red tape. I begged, and they transferred me to someone else who gave me a rehearsed apology and repeated the same lines. So I drove to the police. I showed them the messages. I explained the timeline. I told them her phone had been buried with her, per my instructions, and that these messages were coming after the burial. The officer who took the report had kind eyes, but tired ones. The kind of eyes that see too many grieving parents and never know what to say to them. It's possible the phone was removed from the casket before burial, he suggested. Or maybe the number was reassigned accidentally. It happens sometimes. Messages get delayed or resent through iCloud. But I wasn't using iCloud, and the number had never been reassigned. He wrote a few notes, gave me a card, and said he'd follow up, which I knew meant he wouldn't. And really, could I blame him? How do you tell a police officer, with a straight face, that your daughter is texting you from the grave? I went home. I didn't eat. I didn't rest. I just sat in Lily's room, on the edge of her bed, holding her pillow in one hand and my phone in the other, waiting for something to make sense. And then, around noon, I made a call I hadn't planned to. I called her father, Thomas. We'd been divorced for nearly 6 years, the kind of divorce where you don't talk unless you absolutely have to. But he was the one who had identified her body. He'd seen what I hadn't. Maybe, I thought, he would know something I didn't. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was flat, unsurprised. You okay? Not how are you? Not why are you calling? Just a question he already knew the answer to. Have you gotten any texts? I asked. There was a pause, barely a second, but I felt it. No. Why? From Lily's number, I said. I've gotten 2. They sound like her. He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff, but his answer came too quickly. Too evenly. That's not possible. Her phone was buried with her. I reminded him. You sure about that? He asked. I blinked. Yes, I handed it to the funeral director myself. He was quiet again, then said, Phone's glitch. Maybe it's some kind of auto-send. That was the moment I felt it. Not panic, not anger, but distance. He wasn't confused. He wasn't shocked. He was rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation. After we hung up, I sat frozen for a long time. I couldn't explain what made me suspicious. Maybe it was just the way he spoke. Maybe it was what he didn't say. Or maybe it was because I'd seen how he'd changed in the last year, especially around Lily. They had grown apart. Their arguments used to be about silly things, curfews, missed chores, late-night phone calls, but lately, they'd gotten darker. He'd started calling her reckless, a liability. I remember him telling me once, in frustration, that she was going to bring the whole house down on all of us. I'd thought he was being dramatic, but now, sitting there in her room, the smell of her shampoo still in the pillows, I realized something that made my blood run cold. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of what she might do next. I lasted 2 more days. 2 days of walking in circles around my own house. 2 days of sleeping in short, restless bursts, with one hand always resting on my phone. 2 days of watching the texts continue, each one more urgent than the last. It's cold. I can hear footsteps above me. Please, Mom, don't leave me down here. At first, I tried to convince myself it was some kind of cruel digital residue, like the ghost of a voice trapped in a wire. Then I tried to believe it was a sick prank. Maybe someone who had intercepted her SIM card, though I knew that wasn't possible. Eventually, I stopped trying to explain it, because no matter what I told myself, one truth pressed louder than logic. It sounded like her, not just in tone, but in the way she wrote, the rhythm of her messages, the phrases only she used. And if there was even a chance she was still alive, what kind of mother would I be if I didn't go find her? I waited until well after midnight, when the roads were empty and the sky had turned from black to blue. I packed quietly a flashlight, gloves, my phone, a thermos of water, and a small folding shovel I found in the garage. I didn't bother to write a note or tell anyone where I was going. There was no one left I trusted with this, not after what I was starting to believe. The cemetery was surrounded by a low iron fence, not locked, just old and reluctant. I parked 2 streets over and walked in through the back entrance, the kind that only maintenance workers used. My hands were shaking before I even reached her plot. Lily's grave was in the far west corner, under a crooked tree that had lost most of its leaves early that season. The grass hadn't grown back over the soil. The dirt was still fresh, uneven, like it hadn't quite settled. I stood there for a long time, just looking down at her name carved into the temporary plastic marker. There was no headstone yet, no monument, just her name and the date, as if that was all she had ever been. Then I pulled on the gloves and started to dig. The first few inches were easy, dry topsoil, light and loose. But the deeper I went, the heavier it became. Wet, cold clay clung to my arms, made the shovel useless. I dropped to my knees and used my hands, scraping at the dirt until my fingernails split. The cemetery was silent around me. Even the wind had stopped moving. I don't know how long I dug, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. I lost all sense of time. My focus narrowed to one single point, getting to her. Then the shovel hit something solid. Wood. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My heart beat so loudly in my ears I thought it might wake the dead. I reached down, brushing away the last layer of earth until the lid of the casket was fully exposed. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I ran it along the edges. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe to prove I was crazy. Maybe to prove I wasn't. But then my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I pulled it out. I can hear you. Please, knock. I stared at the screen, unable to move. Please. Mom, I'm so scared. I dropped the phone and fell forward against the dirt. This couldn't be real. It shouldn't be real. And yet, it was happening. I picked up the phone with trembling hands, turned on the flashlight again, and then I knocked 3 times against the lid of the coffin. Silence. Then tap, tap, tap. From inside, I screamed, not out loud, not with my voice, but with every nerve in my body. She was alive. My daughter was alive. I didn't think. I moved. I wedged the blade of the shovel between the lid and the side panel and pushed with everything I had. The casket groaned, wood creaking under pressure. I leaned in harder, my knees sinking into the dirt, sweat pouring down my neck. Then, a crack, a seam gave way. The moment I pried it open, the smell hit me. Not death, not rot, just stale air, like a basement that had been locked for too long. And then, under the beam of my flashlight, I saw her. Her eyes were open, wide, wild. Her skin was pale and soaked with sweat. Her lips were cracked, bruised, and trembling. She clutched something against her chest. Her phone, still glowing, still connected, still saving her, I dropped the shovel and reached for her, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lift her out. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The moment her body touched mine, I felt her heartbeat, faint, but real. She was light, too light, and cold, but she was breathing. I carried her to the car in silence, wrapped in my coat, her fingers gripping the edge like it was a lifeline, and I drove, fast, blind, through every red light, across every intersection, straight to the hospital, and they took her from me at the ER doors, hooked her to machines, called code after code, asked questions I couldn't answer. I stood there in mud-stained jean, covered in sweat and soil, holding a phone that should have been buried 6 feet underground. I didn't cry, not yet, because I had only just begun to understand what had been done to her, and I already knew who I was going to ask first. Lily spent 3 nights in intensive care. She was severely dehydrated, suffering from acute oxygen deprivation, and on the edge of hypothermia when they brought her in, but she was alive, and conscious. She didn't talk at first. Her throat was too raw, her muscles too weak, but her eyes, God, her eyes, never stopped moving. Scanning, fearing, she flinched at the sound of footsteps. She jumped when nurses entered the room, and when the doctor gently asked who had hurt her, she turned to me and started to cry. That was when I knew, without question, who had put her there. I waited until visiting hours ended, and the halls were quiet. Then I stepped out of her room and called her father. Thomas answered on the first ring. "You're calling late," he said, calm as ever. "She's alive?" I told him. Silence. Not a gasp, not a prayer, just dead air on the line. As if he hadn't heard me, or worse, already had. "We're at the hospital," I continued. "She was buried alive, Thomas, and she's going to tell them everything." The next words out of his mouth weren't how, or when, or why. They were, "Does she remember anything?" And in that moment, I knew. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't afraid for her. He was afraid of her. I went to the police the next morning, not the same officer. This time, I asked for a detective. I handed over everything, the messages, the SIM records, the shovel still in the trunk of my car, caked with cemetery soil. I showed them Lily's admittance papers, her blood work, her bruises. They listened, took notes, and when I told them who had signed off on the burial, their expressions changed, because it wasn't just Thomas. It was his older brother, Richard Walker, owner of Walker & Sons Funeral Services, a man I barely spoke to, even when we were still married, a man Lily had once called a snake in a cheap suit. She never liked him. Said he looked at her like she was a nuisance, like she was in the way of something he couldn't quite name. But now it made sense. Thomas hadn't acted alone. He couldn't have. Someone had to falsify the death paperwork. Someone had to handle the body. Someone had to keep the casket sealed and buried. No questions asked. And Richard had been that someone. The police interviewed him 2 days later. At first, he played dumb. Claimed all records had been submitted properly, that he'd never opened the casket because it wasn't required, that everything was by the book. But when they asked why the embalming paperwork was missing, he stuttered. When they asked why Lily's phone was still active, he claimed not to know. And when they showed him a photo of her in the ICU, breathing through a tube, alive, he went quiet. Then, finally, he said Thomas told me she was dead. Not she had died. Not it was an accident. Just Thomas told me. According to the detective, Richard hadn't known the full plan. Not at first. He'd been called in after it happened, after Thomas had somehow staged a fatal accident, drugged her, made her appear dead. He hadn't asked too many questions. He hadn't looked too closely, because family was family, and Thomas said it needed to be done. But the part that broke me, the part that still wakes me up at night, was what Richard said next. She was always a problem, always testing him. She pushed him too far, too many times. I figured, maybe it was better this way. Better. As if she was a loose end. A weight to cut loose. Not a daughter. Not a person. Just an inconvenience. I left the station that day, colder than I'd ever felt in my life. Lily was resting, healing. But I could see it in her eyes. The trust had been broken long before the dirt ever touched her coffin. And now I had to decide what to do next. Because I had answers, I had proof. But what I didn't have was closure. Not yet. Because Thomas was still free, still pretending. Still walking around in that same old suit, shaking hands, pretending to grieve a daughter he had tried to erase. And I wasn't going to let him disappear into the background. Not after what he'd done. They arrested Thomas on a Thursday afternoon. It didn't make the news. There were no handcuffs clicked in front of flashing cameras. Just 2 detectives walking into his office as he typed away at his computer, surrounded by files, calculators, and the remains of a stale coffee. He looked up, and instead of shock, he offered a simple, steady glance. Almost like he'd been waiting for this. The officers asked him to stand. They read him his rights, and just as they started to guide him out, he said only 4 words. So, She's still alive. That was it. Not how or why. Or what do you mean? Just, she's still alive. Like he already knew what they were going to say. Like he'd been dreading it. At the precinct, the detectives didn't even have to press hard. Once the door closed and the recorder beeped on, Thomas talked. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't break down crying. He just explained. Plainly, logically, like he was walking them through a failed business deal. She found the policy. He began. I took it out weeks earlier. I was behind on everything. Taxes, mortgage. The business was bleeding. I didn't think she'd go through the drawer, but Lily did. She always paid attention. She came to me that night, holding the paper in her hand, shaking. She was furious. She called me a fraud. Said she was going to tell you. Said I was insane. His tone shifted there. Not sad, not apologetic, icy. She wouldn't stop yelling. She said she was going to ruin everything. He paused, looked down at his hands. I just needed her to calm down. He said he made tea, put in a few crushed sedatives, prescription, from an old back injury. He didn't say how many. Maybe he didn't count. Maybe he didn't care, and... He waited until she drifted off, then grabbed a plastic dry cleaning bag from the closet. It only took a minute, he said. She went still. I checked her pulse. Nothing. That was the moment he decided it was done. No second guesses. No calling 911. No fear or regret. Just a clean decision. I wrapped her up, called my brother, told him she overdosed, that I didn't want an autopsy. He owed me. And Richard, loyal to the end, agreed to help. No questions. No embalming. Just paperwork. Silence and a sealed casket. They buried her before the sun came up. They buried her alive. I sat in the hallway outside the interview room, hearing this through the glass, unable to breathe. My daughter hadn't died. She'd been silenced, drugged, suffocated, declared dead by the man who swore to protect her. And the worst part, he never once said he was sorry, because in his mind, he still believed he'd done the right thing here. At the trial, the courtroom was so full, it spilled into the hall. Every seat taken. Journalists, neighbors, former clients, strangers. Everyone wanted to see the man who'd buried his own daughter. Lily chose to testify. She walked to the stand with trembling legs, but her chin was high, her voice cracked. But it didn't falter. I remember waking up in the dark. She said, I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I didn't understand why everything was so small, so heavy. And then I realized I was in a box. People wept in silence. She spoke about the texts, the phone she clung to in the dark, the hope that maybe, someone was reading, that I was reading, and I was. Every word. Thomas never looked at her, not once. When it was his turn to speak, he told the judge. She was too loud, too reckless, too much like her mother. She was tearing the family apart. I did what I had to do. He called it a mistake. He called it a necessary mercy. He never called her his daughter. The verdict came fast, guilty, on all counts, attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison. Richard got 3 years for his role, obstruction, falsifying death documents, concealing a living victim. And me, I got Lily back. Not the same girl I raised, not yet, but someone stronger. Someone still fighting. She still woke up some nights in a sweat, still flinched at the sound of footsteps, still reached for her phone before opening her eyes, but she was healing. One breath at a time. One evening, months later. We sat in her room, watching the sunset bleed into the blinds. She turned to me and said softly, "He didn't even check, did he?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, he never checked." Her voice was a whisper. Then he never knew what he buried. She leaned into my arms and finally let herself cry, and I held her the way I should have that night. The way I will for the rest of my life, because this time I was never letting go.